Pain is not the enemy, it is the doorway into the soul. There is one thing modern humans spend a lifetime trying to avoid: pain. We learn to hide our emotions, distract our minds with work, entertainment, and we hope that if we stay busy enough, the wounds will simply disappear. But then, in a moment we don't expect, when we lose something we once held dear, when someone turns away, when the world is no longer as we once believed, pain surges back like an underground wave that was never truly resolved. We often mistake the source of our suffering as external: betrayal, failure, loss. But there is a simple yet awakening truth: what you resist persists. It is not the event itself that creates suffering, but our inner resistance to the reality of that event. You don't suffer because someone left you. You suffer because you cannot accept their leaving. You don't collapse because of what you've lost, but because you're still clinging to what is no longer there. The hard-to-accept truth is this: pain cannot be avoided, and it cannot be erased. It can only be transformed, and the first key to healing does not lie out there, but begins with an inner agreement, the willingness to feel, to face, to understand what you are still carrying in your heart that has yet to be healed. Pain is a disguised lesson, a soul's invitation, quietly whispering, it's time to come home. Home to where? Home to the part of your consciousness you left behind while chasing the external world. Home to the inner wisdom that no longer asks, why me? But begins to wonder, what is this experience here to teach me? This is not an essay that teaches you how to overcome pain through logic. This is a journey that invites you to look inward, not to escape, but to transform. 1. The persistent presence is not about them, it's about you. You think you're haunted by someone. They've been gone for a long time. The story has ended, and reason has told you time and again, it's over. And yet, their image lingers, slipping through memories, dreams, or quiet moments you can't explain. You may have blamed yourself for being weak, for not letting go, or for still having unresolved feelings. But through the lens of Carl Jung's analytical psychology, you'll come to realize their persistent presence isn't about them, it's about a part of you that's still being forgotten. Jung once said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. When someone who has left still lives vividly in your mind, it's not necessarily because they were so unique or irreplaceable. It may be because they symbolize something deeper, an unhealed wound, an aspect of the self that was never acknowledged, or an emotional pattern you've been unconsciously craving since long ago. In Jungian psychology, every human being carries within them a system of archetypes, symbolic images embedded deep in the collective unconscious. When you meet someone and feel like you've known them forever, it may be because they awaken a dormant archetype within you. They are not merely a person, but a gateway, leading you to a forgotten part of your soul. They might remind you of a mother figure, a father figure, the soulmate, or even the shadow, the raw instinctual part of yourself you've yet to face. So longing doesn't always mean the love is unresolved. It can be your inner world calling to you. Look here, something inside you wants to be seen. Perhaps it's the inner child who was once abandoned, who longed for recognition but never received an embrace. And somehow, that person, in their presence, touched that child. You won't miss them. You miss how you felt when you were with them. You miss the vulnerability, the tenderness, the rare feeling of being fully yourself. But if you haven't yet learned to create that feeling on your own, without their presence, your unconscious will continue to summon them as a symbol, a clue, a breadcrumb leading you inward. So instead of asking, why am I still thinking about them? Try asking, what part of me is asking for attention through their image? That's when the real journey begins. You're no longer trying to erase them from your memory. You're seeking the part of yourself they once reflected. It might be a wounded self-esteem, a buried belief that you're not enough, a fear of abandonment, or a quiet longing to be loved unconditionally. And here's the miracle. Once you uncover the hidden message behind their persistent presence, you're no longer consumed by it. They may still appear in a song, in a dream, in the glance of a passing stranger, but you won't panic or ache, because you'll know, it's not a call from the past, it's a signal from within. Carl Jung emphasized that healing doesn't come from erasing someone from your memory, but from integrating the experience into your being, so that you no longer live as if you're missing a piece, but as someone who has journeyed deep enough to know, the part that most needs your love is you. 2. Is it love or the reflection of an unhealed part? There is a painful yet powerful truth. Not all emotions we call love truly stem from love. Many times, what we experience is simply the reflection of an unhealed part within us. a part still yearning to be seen, accepted, and held exactly as it is. Carl Jung once warned, "We do not love others, we love the image of ourselves in them." In other words, what draws you in is not necessarily the other person's true essence, but the image they stir within you, like a mirror reflecting the parts of yourself you've forgotten, denied, or never dared to face. And sometimes, those parts aren't beautiful or sweet. They are full of wounds, fears, and unmet needs. You might miss someone, ache for a past relationship, and believe it was the greatest love of your life. But if you look honestly, you may realize you loved the feeling of being cared for. You loved the comfort they brought during your confusion. You loved the sense of importance you felt in a world where you once saw yourself as invisible. And when they left, what you lost wasn't just them, but the temporary version of yourself that you had built around them. True love does not begin with lack. It doesn't arrive in the form of a perfect half, sent to fill the emptiness within you. But the reflection of an unhealed part is different. It makes you feel like the other person is everything, because your unconscious has assigned them the task of compensating for a part inside you that was abandoned. This creates dependency and then obsession, because if they disappear, what remains within you is pulled back into the same old emptiness. Jung called this phenomenon projection. When you haven't recognized your own wounds, you unconsciously cast them onto others, projecting the image of an ideal father onto the man you love, projecting your longing for protection onto a stranger's glance, projecting your need for healing onto someone who may never understand the depth of your pain. This explains why we often fall into intense relationships that quickly fall apart. Your mind might know they're not right for you, that the relationship is unhealthy, but your heart clings tightly. Why? Because they're not just a person, they're a symbol of your unhealed self. And unless you uncover that truth, you'll believe you're loving deeply, when in fact, you're loving the part of you that's still waiting to be named and healed. This truth doesn't invalidate the feelings you had. It simply invites you to go deeper, to distinguish what is true love and what is a response from pain, what comes from emotional maturity, and what echoes from unmet needs. Try asking yourself, who was I in that relationship? When did I sacrifice to hold on to it? Did I love them, or the version of myself I became around them? And what inside me was most triggered when they left? The answers may sting, but they also mark the beginning of freedom, because once you realize you were loving from your wounds, you finally have the chance to live from wholeness. When you clearly see who really needs to be heard, not the other person, but the unhealed part of you, you step into the space of genuine healing. In the light of awareness, love is no longer an external pursuit. It becomes an inner journey, a return to the place where you stop searching for someone to complete you, and begin to complete yourself, with presence, with truth, and with compassion. Free. Thinking about them isn't being stuck, it's an incomplete process. In the quiet depths of sleepless nights, you may have blamed yourself. Why am I still thinking about them? Even though time has passed, even though your outer world has changed, your work, your friendships, your routines, all it takes is an old song, a passing glance, or a familiar scent, and their image resurfaces, like an undercurrent rising from the unconscious. And then you feel ashamed. You think, maybe I'm not mature enough. Maybe I'm still weak. But if you could pause, not to judge, but to listen, you would realize this lingering presence doesn't necessarily mean you haven't let them go. It may simply mean that you haven't yet completed the process of returning to yourself. Carl Jung once said, "What is not made conscious will continue to occur as fate." This means, every memory not yet digested, every emotion not fully faced, doesn't disappear on its own. It will return, again and again, like a melody with no ending, like a circle that won't close, not because you are inadequate, but because the mind is still trying to complete something left unfinished. When you still think about someone who's gone, it may not be them you're really missing, but a part of yourself that was lost when you loved them. It could be the trust you once gave so wholeheartedly. The desire to live authentically was stifled to fit into their world. The purity of emotion, once rejected, never fully soothed after the heartbreak. And now, even though they are no longer there, those parts of you remain unreclaimed. Your unconscious is calling you back, to retrieve what was abandoned. That's why their image still lingers, not to pull you backward, but to point the way forward, to say, there is something here, still waiting for your return, to be completed with your full presence. Jung called this the process of integration, when what has been separated, denied, or exiled, is finally seen and welcomed back, as a real part of who you are. In love, there are moments where we abandon ourselves just to stay, and when the relationship ends, those forsaken parts don't come back on their own. They need you to return and hold them, with compassion, not blame, so thinking about them isn't being trapped in the past. It's an invitation from within, a gentle reminder. Go back to where you lost yourself, back to the place where you compromised, stayed silent, withdrew from your truth just to keep the peace or avoid being left. And now, your soul is calling you home, not to rewrite the past, but to finally reclaim yourself. That's why the silence after a breakup is never an empty void. It's a threshold, the space where the questions once buried beneath the noise of love begin to rise. Who was I in that relationship? What did I lose? And what can I learn from this loss? Only when you allow yourself to move through the thoughts of that person, instead of avoiding or forcing yourself to forget, can you truly understand why they appeared, and why they still linger in your mind even after they've exited your life. When a memory hasn't been digested, the mind will repeat it, not to torment you, but to invite you to see it clearly. Like a chapter left unread, a dream left unfinished, it will keep calling you back, until you are brave enough to read the last line, and place a final period, not from avoidance, but from understanding. So be gentle with yourself. Longing is not always a sign of unresolved love. Sometimes, it's the soul's instinct to heal, a signal that you are drawing closer to true healing, not by forgetting them, but by understanding yourself more deeply within that relationship. Because in the end, the one who needs you the most isn't the one who left. It's the part of you that is still waiting to be embraced. And when you're courageous enough to complete what was left undone, you won't think of them with a sense of being stuck anymore, but with quiet gratitude. Because of them, I found a part of me I had once lost. 4. Lingering memories are signs of unhealed parts. Have you ever wondered why some memories, ones you thought had long faded with time, suddenly return like an unfamiliar breeze, catching you off guard? A familiar scent, an old street, or a song once shared with someone, suddenly awakens something deep within you. Not a sharp, obvious pain, but a vague, tender ache, as if there's a part of you that still cannot breathe fully. According to Carl Jung, what remains in the unconscious does not vanish with time. It simply lies dormant, waiting for you to return and face it. Memory, especially those tied to intense emotions, is the bridge between your present self and the unhealed places within. A memory does not resurface just to remind you of someone. It comes back to show you this, that at that moment, at that place, you once did something that wasn't entirely truthful to yourself. Perhaps you silenced yourself when you should have spoken. You held back your feelings when they deserved expression. Or worse, you sacrificed a part of yourself, just to be loved, accepted, or chosen, and that left a crack, not in your story with them, but in your relationship with yourself. You don't need to dig through the past to cast blame, but you also can't heal by denying it. What is rejected will return in another form. Jung once said, "Whatever is left in the darkness of the unconscious tends to become fate." What you haven't let go of might not be about still loving them, but about not having forgiven yourself for abandoning your true emotions in that relationship. Think back to all the times you tried to keep things smooth on the outside. While chaos swirled inside, you compromised, adjusted, stepped back, not because that's what you truly wanted, but because you feared losing them. And in that moment, you withdrew your authentic presence. No one forced you to, but you did, because of old wounds, because of a false belief that love requires you to give yourself up. That's where the memory lives. Not in the person, but in the place where you lost yourself. Memory is the residue of unprocessed emotion. It's the forgotten inner voice still whispering for your return. And if you find yourself being drawn back into a past story, it's not to relive it, but to complete something you never got to finish, to care for yourself, to speak your truth, to revisit the story with the eyes of someone who has now grown. Jung called this the process of integrating the shadow, when you look directly at the parts of yourself you once disowned. It could be your softness, your longings, your vulnerability, parts you thought were shameful. But these very pieces are the key to your healing. The real question isn't, when will I stop missing them? It's, what part of me is still waiting for my return? And only when you dare to walk into the room where your memories live, with compassion rather than resistance, can you begin to reclaim the parts of yourself you left behind. We often think healing means no longer feeling pain, but in truth, it's the ability to sit beside the pain without needing to run, to remember without blaming, to reflect without falling apart, and most of all, to love yourself. in the very way you once wished they would have loved you. You don't need to force yourself to forget. You only need to understand why the memory is still there. And when what was once unseen is illuminated by awareness, the memory no longer feels like a burden. It becomes a lesson, a sorrowful song that finally has its final verse, not an echo that never ends. So if you still remember someone, don't rush to escape it. Step into it. Ask, what did I lose in this story? And slowly, you will gather the fragments, the pieces of yourself you once abandoned, not to rebuild the past, but to rebuild you, because the presence of memory is a sign that your soul is longing to be whole again. 5. You don't need to forget them, you need to understand yourself. We often believe that in order to move on, we must forget someone. But the truth is that humans do not forget through willpower. We only let go when emotions have been fully understood and integrated. You don't need to forget that person. What you truly need is to understand why they stayed so long in your mind. Not because they were irreplaceable, but because they touched something very deep, very real within you, that you haven't yet been able to name. Carl Jung once said, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." The fact that you still remember someone, that the memory of them still tightens your chest, doesn't mean you are weak or incapable of letting go. It means a part of you is still searching for clarity, not about them, but about yourself. The version of you who once entered that relationship, with all your longing, your wounds, and your unresolved inner images. They may have left, but the emotions you had when you were with them, those still remain. And the deepest pain isn't their absence. It's the feeling that you never fully understood why it ended, why it hurt so much, and why something inside you still feels unnamed. That longing, in its truest form, is not a call to return to them, but an echo from within, asking to be heard. When you try hard to forget, you're pushing away a part of yourself. When you say, "I must forget them to move on," you're telling yourself that the memory, the emotions, and the part of you who once loved deeply should not exist. But in reality, that was the most honest, most alive part of you. Not for the sake of holding on, but to understand, who was I when I loved? What did I sacrifice? What did I long for? And which feelings did I betray in myself? Forgetting doesn't make you grow. Understanding is the path to true maturity. Understanding that in that relationship, you may have sought validation that you should have given to yourself. Understanding that maybe you were chasing an idealized image because you hadn't yet dared to face the emptiness within. Understanding that it wasn't because you loved them too much, but because you loved the version of yourself that came alive in their presence. And when they left, it felt like that part of you disappeared too. But the truth is, what they awakened in you was never truly lost. The warmth, the openness, the sincerity, the longing for deep connection, those still live in you. And you don't need another person to reclaim them. You only need to know. Every beautiful quality you once gave to them was always a reflection of what already existed within you. They were merely the catalyst, the mirror, that helped you see what was always there. Jung once said, "We do not meet anyone by accident. There is something within us that has summoned them," which means the person who appeared in your life wasn't meant to be clung to, but to help illuminate a part of yourself. And once you truly understand that, you no longer need to forget them, because your attention has shifted from them to yourself. What's needed is not for the memory to vanish, but for you to no longer fear it, to be able to think of them without aching, to recall without collapsing, to see their name somewhere, and still feel peace, because you've reclaimed the part of you once left behind in that story. That's what maturity is, not when you forget someone, but when your soul is no longer trapped in their shadow. You step forward, not because you no longer love, but because you finally understand. That real love begins when you return to your true self. You don't need to deny it, don't need to pretend to be strong, don't need to say, "I've forgotten them." Instead, you can gently admit, "I still remember, but I'm learning more about myself through that memory." And when that understanding becomes full, they will quietly leave your mind, not because you forced them out, but because your inner light has made their presence no longer necessary. 6. You miss them because a part of you is asking to come home. You may have asked yourself many times, "Why'd I still miss them? I know I shouldn't. I understand they're no longer part of my life. But why does my mind keep returning? In the long, quiet nights, in those sudden moments, when a song plays or a passing phrase brings them back, the answer doesn't lie in them. It lies in the part of you that hasn't returned home yet." Carl Jung once said, Anything that causes a powerful emotional reaction has roots in the unconscious. Old memories aren't just fragments of the past. They are gateways into parts of the soul not yet understood. When you remember someone, it's not always because you still love them, but because they once touched a part of you you had forgotten, abandoned, or never dared to face. You miss them because when you were with them, you were a very real version of yourself. Perhaps it was your softness that you usually hide. Perhaps it was a tenderness you never allowed yourself to show. Perhaps it was a deep belief that you were worthy of being seen, of being loved. And now that they're gone, you're not just missing them, you're missing who you were when you were with them. That's why you can't simply let go. Because, on a deeper level, losing them also meant you left a part of yourself behind. Because you have returned, and you no longer need them to feel complete, you've realized that the ache was never truly about them. It was about your own disconnection from your truth, from your feelings, from the parts of yourself you once handed over, hoping to be loved. Now, you hold them gently. You see your story not as a tragedy, but as a turning point, a chapter that led you back to the most important relationship of all, the one you have with yourself. So let the memory stay. If it needs to, let the feelings rise. If they must, you don't need to suppress them to prove you're healed. Healing is not forgetting. Healing is remembering without fear. It's looking at your past self and saying, you did the best you could. You loved deeply. You hoped honestly. And now, you're finally coming home. If you're still thinking about someone who's gone, know this isn't weakness or failure. If you're still thinking about someone who has left, know that it isn't a sign of weakness or failure. It may very well be an invitation from your soul to return to a part of yourself you once abandoned. Carl Jung once said, you cannot become whole without confronting your shadow. And that person, whether intentionally or unintentionally, was the mirror that reflected the parts of yourself you have yet to fully understand, the need to be loved, the fear of being left behind, or the inner voice you silenced. In order to preserve a connection, we do not heal by trying to forget. We heal by courageously facing the truth. Who was I in that relationship? What did I lose? And what have I learned? Only when you can name those truths does memory stop being a wound and become a teacher. They don't need to come back. Their role in your life is complete. What remains now is the journey back to yourself, not to another person, but to you. And someday, you will remember them, not with tears, but with gratitude. Not because they stayed, but because thanks to them, you learned how to stop abandoning yourself. That's the moment. You no longer need them to show up, because you have finally shown up for yourself. And in that moment, letting go is no longer an act of effort, but a natural state, as light as breath, as deep as freedom.